It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, Shadow Attorney-General Emily Thornberry, Conservative MP Laura Farris, The Sun's political editor Harry Cole and The Mirror's political editor Pippa Crerar. Today, a Downing Street drinks party took place in the depths of the spring 2020 lockdown.
Boris Johnson, having survived COVID himself, thought it was appropriate to host a party where you could bring your own booze.
I totally appreciate why people will feel angry and very upset and hurt by these allegations.
I cannot conceive of how this ever happened, how it seems to have happened multiple times.
Is the flat-pack giant Ikea right to stop paying the unvaccinated to isolate? And a former Love Island star and entrepreneur ignites a social media storm with this.
We all have different backgrounds and we're all raised in different ways and we do have different financial situations, but I think if you want something enough, you can achieve it.
Let's start with that evidence of a drinks event in Downing Street on the 20th of May 2020, where staff were invited to bring your own booze. Now, this was, of course, during that first very strict national lockdown. Witnesses have told BBC News that there were around 30 people in attendance, including the Prime Minister and his wife. But Boris Johnson has so far declined to say whether or not he was there. Let's just look at the email which was leaked to ITV News. It seems to show Martin Reynolds, the Prime Minister's principal private secretary, inviting colleagues to a drinks event. He wrote, "Hi all, after what has been an incredibly busy period, we thought it would be nice to make the most of the lovely weather and have some socially distanced drinks in the No. 10 garden this evening. Please join us from 6 p.m. and bring your own booze, Martin." Now, we can see some messages sent by Downing Street staff in response to that invitation. These have been shown to BBC News. One says, why is Martin Reynolds encouraging a mass gathering in the garden? And another one says, is this for real? My question to the panel is, if you had received an invitation like that, what would you have done, Laura?
I would have declined it. I think the rules were clear and unequivocal at that point in time. I don't think anyone thought you were meant to be having parties.
But if you'd received from Martin Reynolds, very senior person in the No. 10 operation, that invitation, you would, without any shadow of a doubt, hand on heart, said, I'm not coming.
Yes.
Pippa.
Well, I'd have written about it because I'm a journalist. So I doubt I'd have been on the invite list. But of course I'd have declined it. I was, like many people, I've been looking back through my photographs from May last year. You know, they're all of my, my daughter celebrating her 7th birthday with a Zoom party, my kids in the park without their friends, my mother-in-law in her care home talking to us on a care worker's mobile phone. The same as everybody. And I think that is why this cuts through so much. It was, as you say, the first lockdown, the hardest lockdown, and everybody has their own stories of sacrifices that they had to make in their own personal lives while this was happening in the No. 10 garden.
How would you have responded, Harry, if you've got that invitation, a work invitation, it had been a very difficult few months, would you have unequivocally said no?
I think those messages that you just displayed there that Laura got last night with people in the building were saying, what the hell is this? Why are they doing it?
30 people went.
Well, yeah, 100 people invited, 30 people went. I think this really, if this is the level of advice that was circulating around No. 10 at the height of lockdown, it makes you wonder how we, solves some of the questions of how we got into such a large mess. As a country during this, if that was the level of behaviour at the very centre of the organisation, meant to be leading our response to it, to have such a brazen disregard of the rules, as it was a prima facie evidence of.
Emily?
I was listening to Women's Hour earlier and listening to all the messages from people saying the most terrible things that they had been through, and it made you cry, because I think that it stirs up all the memories that you have, and we've all been through a collective trauma. It was absolutely traumatic what was going on. At that time, we didn't know how we were ever going to get out of this. We didn't know how it spread. We knew that people were being killed, and we knew that the NHS was overwhelmed, and we had rules that we had to stick to, and people stuck to them, apart from those making the rules at number 10 who thought those rules didn't apply to them.
Right, well, let's just remind ourselves what the rules were at the time, what the public were being told to do then, during that first lockdown in May 2020. We can see what a Cabinet Minister said on national television on that very day, the 20th of May, the day the event took place in Downing Street. Here's Oliver Dowden.
You can spend time outdoors and exercise as often as you like, and you can meet one person outside your household in an outdoor public place, provided that you stay 2 metres apart.
Laura, your response?
Well, yeah, Jo, I've already said I accept that those were the rules. I recall them clearly. Many of my constituents made considerable sacrifices at that time. I did myself. My mum went through cancer treatment on her own that year, so I'm not kind of arguing about what the scope of the rules was at that time.
Right. I mean, looking at the evidence, do you now believe the Prime Minister broke his own COVID rules?
Look, I hadn't seen any of that until I looked at social media last night, and I have nothing, no reason to believe that the Prime Minister was there or not. He hasn't said so. I know it sounds like a sort of generic answer to say that there is an investigation ongoing, but, look, Emily and I are both lawyers, and I hope that we have due deference for the importance of a fair procedure. And I do think that Sue Gray is entitled to conclude her investigation without a running commentary. The only thing I can really provide as personal context, I think, is my own recollection of what it was like being a brand new backbench MP, immediately thrown into lockdown. All I recall really from that time are two things. First of all, that only a few weeks before the Prime Minister had nearly died and he'd been in intensive care. And then he was, I think, released from hospital and went into a short period of convalescence. And then I think the same month, his wife had a baby, their first son. So it was, my recollection is of him having a near-death experience. And I'm not immediately aware that he was attending parties or anything like that. And it's never been something that's been suggested before.
Emily, should we wait for Sue Gray?
Well, first of all, there's been absolutely no attempt to deny the fact that the Prime Minister was at the party. But frankly, even if he wasn't, there were more than 100 people invited to a party at his house. And he was a Prime Minister. And what was he doing? Was he in the garden shouting at people going, "Go away, don't be in my garden, you're breaching the rules"? No. I think they're all hiding behind the Sue Gray inquiry now. But can I just remind people how the Sue Gray inquiry happened? On the 8th of December, the Prime Minister, at Prime Minister's question, stood behind the dispatch box and he said how furious he was to learn that Downing Street staff were making light of the restrictions, how furious people would be to think that those who were setting the rules were not following them, but that he had been told that there were no parties and no breaches of the rules. Now, that's what he last said to Parliament. He has an obligation under the Ministerial Code to come back to Parliament and to explain whether he has told them lies or not. And if he told the lies deliberately, then the Ministerial Code says he should go and see the Prime Minister and resign. Now, that's how it works. But instead, what they're doing is they're going, oh, we've asked Sue Gray to look at it, so we can't possibly say anything. What, they're going to prejudice it? No. People want to know, at last, some truth from the Prime Minister's lips instead of all these lies. What they do is they cover up and they hope that nobody will find out. And then when people do, they start lying and spinning. And then they say, oh, it doesn't really matter.
Laura?
Well, I don't think anyone's covering anything up. Sue Gray's report will be a matter of public record and the public have a right to know. I completely accept that. But I don't know what Emily's saying. Should the investigation be disregarded altogether?
Absolutely
should
not.
It be trial by
Absolutely
Twitter?
We carry on with the investigation, but the Prime Minister should correct the record now.
All right, let Laura finish your point.
Sorry, Jo. It just simply is it fair that she has the opportunity to complete her investigations and to conclude the procedure and to produce a report, and I think that she does.
Right. Laura, there is one question. Why does Boris Johnson need anyone, Sue Gray or anyone else for that matter, to tell him whether he attended this event? He knows. He's refused to answer that question. He knows if he was at the event. Why do we need an investigation to establish that?
Well, of course he knows he was at the event, but the fact that he hasn't commented to journalists doesn't mean that he's withholding that information. He said that...
Harry?
I think they would have cleared it up by now if they had a leg to stand on. The problem, I think there's a threefold problem for the Prime Minister on this one. One, it is an allegation that directly involves him personally. Two, there's a paper trail. There's email evidence out there in the open. That's why the line that they're hiding behind Sue Gray is particularly powerful, because they don't have 2 weeks to explain this. The evidence is out there. And three, I think it's because it is at a time when lockdown was so strict. This is when police were patrolling in parks. I got told off for sitting on a bench when I was out on a run. Because it was at that time at peak lockdown. That's why it's so toxic.
Right.
May I just say, I mean, I asked the Attorney General last week about this, because magistrates across the country are at the moment implementing the rules. They're people are being prosecuted in front of magistrates, and the magistrates are supposed to give them some sort of penalty. How can they do that when they hear that at number 10 they were breaching the rules with complete impunity?
And Laura, you said at the beginning of the show there was a breach of the rules with this event. We heard what the Cabinet Minister at the time said. You could only meet one other person outdoors. Now, there were more than 2 people at this event, so the rules were broken. It was an illegal gathering on the basis of that at number 10 in the garden, wasn't it?
Well, look, Jo, all I've seen is the email that went out last night. I accept it's clear on its face. Nobody is above the rules, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. I heard Emily's question to the Attorney General last week, and look, I accept that the rules applied equally to everyone. I'm not disagreeing.
Right. Is it defensible, the Prime Minister's position, hiding behind, as Emily is saying, this investigation by Sue Gray?
I don't know that he's hiding behind. I don't accept that he's hiding behind, because I don't know what he said to Sue Gray. And I've said, I think, consistently through my answer, there's an independent investigation. I think it's entitled to reach a fair conclusion.
Does it need to happen today, Laura? Because you're under pressure here as a backbench Conservative MP answering these questions on behalf of your Prime Minister and your government. How sustainable is this position if we have to wait days before we get some sort of clarification or the result of this investigation?
And Laura, why should you be put into such an impossible position?
Laura?
I mean, it's not fair on you, quite frankly.
I think with an investigation of this kind, it is appropriate that it is concluded swiftly. I accept that. I have no idea whether it's appropriate to conclude today, because I understand that she's investigating a number of different allegations, and I have no idea where she is in that process. But I do think that it should be resolved. I think I actually read that it was her intention to resolve it, certainly in the early part of January, which we're in. But I think probably what the public most will want to know is just sort of what happened, and to hear it accurately from her. And I think one of the few things, I suppose, is that she is seen as a trusted, impartial person to deal with this matter. And therefore, I think it's right that she reports in due course.
But don't you think she's under an obligation to come back to Parliament? Don't you think he's under an obligation to come back to Parliament? If he has lied to Parliament, isn't he under an obligation to come back and correct the record? And shouldn't he be doing that now? I mean, actually, there's an urgent question now. He should be coming back and talking to Angela Rayner. He should want to. He shouldn't need to be dragged there. He should want to go back and correct the record. That's kind of what our system is about.
Of course, I understand the attraction for you as the Shadow Attorney General of presenting the Prime Minister as a lawbreaker. I understand why you're seeking to do that, and to exploit the political advantage. You don't have evidence of that. It may be regrettable that Sue Gray hasn't concluded her report, but you don't yet have that evidence.
All right. Well, let's play you something. Well, let's play you something that Boris Johnson has already said. This is him in the House of Commons in December last month.
I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party, and that no COVID rules were broken.
Now, I mean, how important is it that Boris Johnson clears that up, reassured that no rules were broken? There was no party.
As I recall, is that in reference to the Allegra Stratton video clip that circulated I was in this. I think I was in the chamber for that.
Right. So are you saying that he's referring to that party, forgetting about the party that we're discussing in May 2020? He says very clearly, I have been reassured by officials. Yeah, but he says I've been reassured by officials. No rules have been broken, and there was and has been no party.
So, Jo, that was I think that was an extract from Prime Minister's questions, and I recall being in the chamber when the question was asked to him, and it was a response to the video of Allegra Stratton and others in the press room where they were discussing a party, and that's what he was responding to. And I don't think that was the answer that he gave, and I know that falls within the scope of Sue Gray's investigation too.
Pippa, fair enough?
Well, no, because I think the problem is that this wasn't just one isolated response in the Commons throughout. From the very beginning, from the very first day on December the 1st that we at the Mirror revealed that first story about those first couple of parties, and the ones which we've subsequently reported on and have come to light since then, Number 10's response has been to double down, to deny that any rules were broken, repeatedly suggesting that, not denying the events took place crucially, but suggesting that no rules have been broken. And it's very much the sort of the strategy we've seen from this Number 10 throughout, of not wanting to admit they've done anything wrong, of doubling down, of trying to sort of battle it out. We've seen it on numerous occasions with a whole host of issues, not just this particular Partygate one. And on almost every occasion, it hasn't worked because people don't like the cover-up. People want to get to the truth, and it's inspired more people to come forward.
Should you resign now, Emily?
I think I want to hear what he has to say first. I think we should hear what he has to say. I think that he needs to come back and correct the record. I think we need to hear from Sue Gray, and then a decision needs to be made.
Right, and Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, has said, I think Boris Johnson should go. There are no excuses. He's lost the confidence of the British public. Is she right?
Well, he's certainly lost the confidence of the British public.
But that he should go.
And if I was in his position, I would want to resign. I would be completely ashamed of myself and I would want to go. I cannot see how he can exercise proper leadership now when he has lost the confidence of the public. You know, it is a matter for him, it's a matter for Tory backbenchers, but frankly, and we need in Parliament to be holding him to account, so he needs to come to Parliament and explain himself.
All right, well, let's look at the damage that is being done. Let's look at some of the paper headlines. The Daily Mail, Boris rocked by new party revelations. This is the headline in the next newspaper. Mirror, your paper, Pippa, invite to do what you like. Number 10 party email bombshell, which we heard at the beginning. Daily Express, enough, Boris. You must end Partygate farce right now. Harry, how much damage has been done to the Prime Minister? And there's the eye. Bring your own booze.
Well, look, I think you just got to look at the situation you've got today. You've got a Prime Minister bunkered down. He's got 24 hours, literally almost, well, just less than 24 hours now before he appears in the House of Commons. He sent out a colourful and flamboyant junior minister to presumably delay and stall Labour's urgent question today, and it's pretty clear they're quite snookered and they don't really have an answer yet. And I think the longer that void it comes from Number 10, the more it's going to be filled with tragic stories, with anger, and people saying the quieter you are, the more you've got to hide. I think I would recommend they come out now and put their hands up.
As you say, urgent question is probably going on in the next few minutes. We will try and bring all of you the response from the Paymaster General, Michael Ellis, before 1 o'clock. Damage being done.
Well, the Prime Minister is not the type to put his hands up and say and do a mea culpa. So I suspect Harry's right that they will just carry on trying to hope that it goes away. But the response is going to be, that space is going to be filled. And the problem for the Prime Minister right now, mid-term, when it's 2 years till a general election, is the threat that's posed by his backbenchers, who are incredibly febrile over a whole range of different issues in the run-up to Christmas. And Number 10 struck this sort of fragile New Year truce and came into the New Year thinking that they'd be able to start afresh. And that is literally, that Dominic Cummings message on Friday night, that blog, put a grenade under it and exploded it all. So that threat from backbenchers remains.
Tory backbenchers are openly talking about it to us.
Pippa is spot on in the fact that there was this feeling that with managed to wriggle out of further restrictions over Christmas, there was actually a bit of a reset. There was a bit of a feeling that they'd come back. They were getting back on the track for open up a bit more, lose the masks, lose, numbers hopefully going the right way, and that's all been now blown out the water. But, Dominic Cummings never... Revenge is a dish served cold, you might say, but...
and continually, it seems.
Continually.
Laura, do you agree, though, with what's being said? You can't really get back to any sort of agenda while this is ongoing.
I do agree that a line needs to be drawn under this, but I think that because I do think it's a huge distraction, and I do see that it's playing, of course, into the way the public feel about what was asked of them in those early months of 2020, and I don't deny any of that. I think it's too early, actually, though, if we're sort of moving on to how the kind of the new parliamentary term is going to judge, because there was a big call made by the Prime Minister just before Christmas not to impose any further restrictions. Contrary to some of the things that are coming out of Labour, they were very much forecasting that further restrictions would or should be coming down the line. And in fact, they weren't, and it does. But that is right, because I was in.
Well, then do quote us. Do quote us. Do quote.
Let her finish, and I'll get you to respond. Yeah, but hang on. What is it you're referring to, though, Laura? Because Keir Starmer has broadly supported what the Prime Minister and the government has said on restrictions.
It was the comment, I think, by Wes Streeting on the 19th of December that something like that the restrictions were likely to be the first of many, or that this was the beginning of restrictions. And in fact, the whole Plan B has so far has ended up being the limit of the restrictions. And as I say, the Prime Minister took a gamble over Christmas. I think it's probably right to say that there were medical voices urging him to go further, and he declined to do so. And at the moment, it looks like that has been the right strategy. And I think, obviously, we know that there are lagging indicators with COVID, so it's not clear to say exactly what's happening, other than it looks at an early stage as if it was the right call. And I think. Okay,
so let me just clear this up very quickly. So, the Plan B came in because Labour voted for it, because the Tory Prime Minister had no control over his backbenchers. Number one. Number two, we called for no further restrictions than that. That's simply a lie put about by guess who? Boris Johnson. So don't repeat it, Laura, because really there's not. I mean, it's really not right.
And was the First Minister in Wales, Mark Drakeford, Labour, First Minister, wrong then to have more restrictions there?
It's a matter for him what he does within Wales. But what I'm trying to do is correct what Laura has said. And can I just make my third point, which is we will all remember, won't we, that the Prime Minister went to his cabinet and asked for further restrictions, and his cabinet stopped him. So let's just stick to the truthful path.
Well, the reporting was that there was a split. Harry, briefly before we move on.
I mean, Wes Streeting did go on the radio. It's a matter of public record that Wes Streeting on the radio said that we would need further restrictions.
That we might need further. But I mean,
that aside, he did say he might need further restrictions.
All right,
and we still might.
All right. Well, very on true. That, let's continue though on the COVID theme. I just want to show you this BBC News story. Ikea cuts sick pay for unvaccinated staff forced to self-isolate. So yes, they have indeed cut the amount workers who are unvaccinated would get if they had to self-isolate because they'd been in close contact with someone who has COVID. It's different, of course, if you have been fully vaccinated. Is that fair or unfair, Emily?
I quite understand where they're coming from, but I'm afraid we do have to make sure that people isolate if they need to. And if IKEA cuts people's wages that they would be paid if they were self-isolating and forced them back to work, that doesn't do any of us any good. So whilst I understand their impatience and I understand why these people need to self-isolate because they've not been vaccinated, they don't necessarily have any symptoms, but they could still be infectious. And so they do have to self-isolate. They just need to be persuaded to get themselves vaccinated for the sake of all of us.
Wrong approach, Laura?
I think, like Emily, actually, I have some sympathy with what IKEA are doing because, of course, their workers will still get statutory sick pay. They just won't get the contractual enhancement. I think it's quite high risk for IKEA, actually, because I think there's some exposure to a claim of indirect discrimination under Section 19 of the Equality Act, actually. And the reason I think that's a risk.
But in principle, would you support this idea, this action taken by IKEA or not? Sort of tightening the screws, if you like, on unvaccinated.
It's worth looking at what a claim like that might look like if it was brought in the Employment Tribunal, and if that policy disproportionately impacted, I don't know, say younger workers or workers of a certain ethnic background, and IKEA couldn't show that there was a legitimate aim for what they were doing and they were choosing proportionate means of achieving that aim, they could be exposed as a matter of employment law. So I read with interest what they were doing, and I think although I was sympathetic to why they were doing it, I thought it was quite high risk.
All right, well, it's not the first sector to take action or have action imposed on it in terms of unvaccinated staff losing their jobs if they don't get the vaccines. That is what's happening in care homes and to care home staff since last November. Let's talk to Nadra Ahmed, the chair of the National Care Association. Nadra, thank you for joining us. What's been the impact of that policy? Nadra, we can't hear you. You might be muted. Can you unmute yourself?
My apologies.
That's it.
My apologies.
Go for it.
Well, the impact has been quite substantial because we already had come into the COVID period with 110,000 vacancies, and even more actually when we looked at the part-time bit. But what it did do is it obviously further exacerbated that. We've got to think about the fact that we need the vaccinations. We absolutely endorse that. I think it was the haste with which it was actually introduced for only care homes, which made it really difficult for us to argue all the points that were being raised with us. So we lost anywhere between 35 and 40,000 because as soon as it was announced, people started to go into the health service, go into home care, where they wouldn't have to have it. And we just didn't have the time to persuade them.
Right, 30 to 40,000. I mean, Laura, is that a price worth paying? That's a devastating loss of people from the care home workforce.
I have to say, I haven't seen... Sorry, forgive me, somebody else was speaking.
No, it's all right, go on.
I haven't seen figures to sustain that. I think one of the things that is a little bit misunderstood about the regs that came in November is that care homes already could and were lawfully dismissing unvaccinated staff before that, because many had taken the view that given their overriding duty of care to the elderly and vulnerable people that they look after, that they couldn't have unvaccinated staff in frontline roles. And if they had alternative sort of back office stuff, they were often offering them those roles as an alternative. But if not, they were moving to dismissal. And I think it's right to say there hasn't been a single case where an unvaccinated, prior to the regs, an unvaccinated care home worker has successfully sued for unfair dismissal on that basis.
Well, Nadra, you're shaking your head.
I mean, I don't know where that came from because I don't know care homes that were dismissing people. I think they were trying to persuade people and people were making decisions themselves. It would have been unfair dismissal at that point because obviously we didn't have the mandatory regulations in place, so we wouldn't have been able to do that. So I don't think that's right. And I don't know where that's coming from. People left, those who left of their own free will to go and join another bit of the sector that didn't need to be vaccinated. That's the fact. And the other bit in all of this is that on the 11th of November, the rest of the people who were hoping for a stay of execution almost, stayed until the bitter end, trying to stay in the sector. It was a desperate situation.
Right, I mean, it's a desperate situation. You're supporting it too. You have done in the Labour Party. Do you think it's doing more harm than good, this policy?
So we think that it's right to have compulsory vaccination of people in the National Health Service, but we have real concerns about care, because particularly since whilst in the NHS the date was put back, as has been alluded to, in care it wasn't. And so I don't believe that there are people who work in care who don't care about those who they're looking after. They want to do everything the best for them, and they need to be persuaded that it's in their interest and in the interest of the person they're caring for to be vaccinated. And as has been said, it takes a lot of work and we need to make sure that it happens. But by having this arbitrary cut-off in November, I mean, the idea that we've lost 30 to 40,000 care workers as a result can be doing nobody any good.
Right. Do you have sympathy, Nadra, though, with people who say, look, if you're working with old, vulnerable people, that they need to be kept safe, and it is the duty of care homes to ensure that by making sure their staff are vaccinated?
Absolutely. And we've had infection prevention control measures in our services long before COVID hit. We've kept neuroviruses out. We've done everything physically possible to try and keep the residents safe. So we absolutely endorse that vaccination should have been in. I think it should have been the whole sector. We shouldn't have been singled out. And it shouldn't have been done within 4 months of the vaccination becoming available. It just didn't give us enough time to start talking, so the consultation, the talk about it being a consultation being launched was in April, which was just 4 months after this vaccination was available. And it made people in the care sector feel as though they were being blamed for something that they actually had no control over. They'd already been badly treated.
All right, I mean, Harry and Pippa, I mean, one of the other consequences is that the Welsh NHS Confederation said at the end of last week that up to 15% of hospital beds were occupied by people who are medically fit to leave but who didn't have the right care for them to be able to either go to a care home or home at all because of a shortage of staff.
Well, I mean, this gets to the crux of it, that there is an issue with care staffing across the board, and there was was well before COVID. I mean, that's a whole other topic really to get into. But of course, it sounds like this may have made it worse to a certain degree. But the problem about the timing aspect, the government was frankly on a sort of a lose-lose here, because there's an urgency to this. The threat to very vulnerable people in care homes is now, or was, in the last few months. So removing that threat by insisting that people were vaccinated, you can understand why they felt they had to do it. The downside, of course, is that makes it much more difficult for care homes to find the staff in already a difficult marketplace. And maybe as well as the sort of the extra communications which has been talked about, and sort of trying better to persuade people to get the jab, because there is this sort of rump of 5 million people across the UK, not just working in the NHS and care, that are still resisting getting the jab. Maybe there also should have been some temporary measures such as increasing pay, which is incredibly low in the sector, to encourage people to join it who had been vaccinated. Harry?
Yeah, I'm always very much more of a carrot and a stick person. There's an ideological argument about whether the state can mandate people to do this versus private companies like Ikea. That I think can be parked for another day. But in the short term, we have to look at the reality of the situation as well. And look, I've had my booster. I'm double jabbed. I think everyone should have their booster. But with the current Omicron variant, the evidence is all showing that the vaccine, while brilliant and fantastic at preventing serious illness and death, isn't actually doing that much to stop infections at the moment. So actually, could there be a sort of stay of a pause on this? In the long term, yes, we want everyone jabbed, but in the short term, where there are massive staff shortages, not just in care homes, across travel, across transport, teachers, staff, is this really the priority right this very second? Perhaps not.
Nadra Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to talk about isolation period for people who have tested positive. Let me just show you this headline in the Daily Telegraph. Cabinet anger over misleading isolation guidance. Now, this is discussion around reducing the isolation period to 5 days for those testing positive, being considered by ministers who had cited what was happening in the United States, but have been told that the rules there were based on people counting their isolation period differently. That was once they had a confirmed positive test rather than when they had symptoms. In fact, that isn't the case. They do count it the same way as here. We can read you this advice from the Centres for Disease Control and Prevention there. People with COVID-19 should isolate for 5 days. And if they are asymptomatic or their symptoms are resolving, follow that by 5 days of wearing a mask when around others to minimise the risk of infecting people they encounter. The change is motivated by science demonstrating that the majority of SARS-CoV-2 transmission occurs early in the course of illness, generally in the 1 to 2 days prior to onset of symptoms and the 2 to 3 days after. Laura, should the government go ahead and reduce the isolation period to 5 days?
Well, I'm not the expert on this. I think we're still working through the reduction to 7 days. I think it's already made quite a difference, actually.
You're gone. Sorry, Laura, we lost your sound there just for a moment, but carry on.
So I think it's already a fairly big jump to move from 10 to 7 days with the lateral flow testing on day 6 and day 7. So look, I would always defer to what Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance thought was appropriate. Obviously, I can see in the context of staff shortages as an attraction, but the last thing you want is symptomatic people at large in the kind of community. At the moment, I think the day 6 test followed by a day 7 test and then release seems like a sort of proportionate truncation of the isolation period, which I think 10 days was a really long time for people who were asymptomatic. And I think it caused a lot of frustration, both from the people who were isolating at home and the people who employed them.
Do you think this will change anything, the fact that the guidance perhaps was wrong given to the government in terms of the picture in the States?
Yeah, you can put a shiny new plaque on Public Health England, who haven't had a brilliant track record on some of the things they've got wrong during this pandemic. I think the change is very much coming. The political will is there for it, both on the government side, and Keir Starmer said he will support it. I think they're just waiting for the nod from the boffins.
Emily?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just have to follow the scientific advice. I don't think I've got anything to add, really.
All right, well, let's move on. Talk about the social media influencer, Molly May Hague, former Love Island contestant who has her own clothing brand. She gave an interview to the Diary of a CEO podcast, commenting on something that she had said previously, you're given one life and it's down to you what you do with it. And I do think if you want something enough, you can achieve it. Let's have a listen to her.
when I've spoken about that before in the past, I have been slammed a little bit with people saying, you know, like, it's easy for you to say that, you know, you've grown up and you've not grown up in poverty, you've not grown up, you know, with major money struggles. So for you to sit there and say that we all have the same 24 hours in a day is not correct. And I'm like, but technically what I'm saying is correct. We do. So I understand that obviously we all have different backgrounds and we're all raised in different ways and we do have different financial situations. But I think if you want something enough, you can achieve it. And it just depends to what lengths you want to go to get where you want to be in the future.
So her comments have sparked a social media backlash, accusing her of not understanding class divides and poverty and branding her Thatcherite. And they have, or somebody has, edited her Wikipedia page, which we can show you here. Molly May Thatcher, it says. Pippa, is it fair, all the comments and backlash and abuse she received for saying what she did?
Look, she's a young girl who seems to have done pretty well for herself, having appeared on Love Island, and I actually feel quite sorry for her that she's sort of, you know, stuck her head above the parapet and she's being shouted down from all quarters. Now, it is true that she has not had, as she herself acknowledged, as hard a start in life as others. You know, she didn't have to struggle through poverty or having to deal with sort of a difficult family situation. So she probably was, you know, in a position where things maybe came a little bit easier to her. But, you know, I think sort of like laying all the sort of world of criticism about the sort of difficulties and problems that many people face across the country through poverty at her door isn't really fair.
I mean, if you listen to what she said, it was a generic comments that could have come from any single leader's conference speech from any politician of any stripe.
Do you think that's where she got it from?
No, but it was so generic what she said. There's a particularly nasty part of the left in this country that run amok on social media, and they hate aspiration. They snuff it out every opportunity that they have, and they bully people. And I feel really sorry for her. She's been targeted by that, and frankly, she should stick to her guns and tell them where to go.
Emily? Is there a particularly nasty side
so
of it?
I think she should be applauded for the success. And she's a young woman and things have kind of gone pretty well for her, and I don't think that she's had any particular difficulties. I don't think she should read across from her own experience of life to the experience of others. And I presume that when she gets older, you know, if God forbid, you know, she did become ill, or she got a disability, or she had children, or, you know, things did not go as well, then perhaps she would understand that some people really struggle, and that for some people 24 hours is 24 hours of struggle, and that they don't achieve as much as others because some people have a leg up. And the reason that's and unlike her, Margaret Thatcher ought to have had a better understanding of the world, but she continued, despite not being young, to believe that we were all equal, that we all had equal chance, and that therefore if you didn't do well, you should, you can see it, you know, close down the coal mines, close out the coal areas, not having any care for those who were marginalised and who had a harder time. You know, that is Thatcherism, and there was no excuse for that. But a young woman from Love Island hopefully will grow up and understand that life is a bit harder than she first thought.
Of course it is, but aspiration shouldn't be a dirty word. And it's becoming a dirty word in this country. It's becoming a dirty word on the left, and frankly, it's becoming a dirty word in the Labour Party. And take just one tiny example.
Not a dirty word on the left.
One of the funniest things after the budget was when the Labour Party found one thing to attack in a budget was this idea that Prosecco and champagne, or English sparkling wine, should somehow become cheaper. People love buying Prosecco. It's a very popular product in this country. People like to go out and celebrate and buy a bottle of bubbly. And what did the Labour Party call it? They called it a millionaires and bankers tax. No, it's an attack on aspiration. Why shouldn't people aspire to have a nice time with a bottle of Prosecco?
Pippa?
Well, I'm always up for a bottle of Prosecco.
Maybe
a bit early in the day.
But what do you think generally? Aspiration, it's a dirty word on the left?
It is interesting if you look at the left in the last few years, it definitely isn't a dirty word under the current Labour leadership. I think probably there is an argument that under the previous one, under Jeremy Corbyn, there were people within the movement that felt quite uncomfortable about that sort of the connotations of aspiration, because they, like Harry suggested, sort of associated with Thatcherism and sort of, you know, as long as everything's great for me, greed is good, doesn't matter about anyone else. And of course, that's not the case. Really, in real life, aspiration represents people wanting to improve their own lives and the lives of their children. And I think that is something that the current Labour Party is very comfortable with.
We continue to have an obligation to assist others where and when we can.
Right. Well, let me just, before I come to you, Laura, Molly May has actually issued a statement. This is part of it. I apologise to the people that have been affected negatively or misunderstood the meaning of what I said in the podcast. The intentions of the podcast were only ever to tell my story and inspire from my own experience. What's your reaction, Laura? Do you think she's been treated unfairly, or has she been naive and needs to grow up, as Emily says?
Oh, give her a break. She's just a young girl talking about her own experience. She's talking about the fact that she's been resourceful and she's worked hard. And this is what I hate about social media. She's, you know, being like crucified for maybe one slightly ill-judged comment, as if she lacks empathy or doesn't understand coal miners or is somehow making some big remark. I think what she was saying, she was trying to encourage people, I think, to follow her lead. I agree with what Harry said about aspiration, and I don't think she needed to apologise. And I really can't stand the fact that she's been sort of demonised for fairly innocent remarks and the kind of thing that any young person can say and maybe slightly misspeak or not, you know, have the fullest tone in mind when they speak and have to answer for it forever as if they've committed a crime. It's ridiculous.
Right, do you think it was a bit unfair of you to call her Molly May Thatcher?
I didn't call her that.
No, the Wikipedia
right.
edited to call her that.
The point is, you become a Thatcherite if you also think that you have no obligation to society and you have no obligation to help others. Exactly. Exactly.
That's also nonsense, though, isn't it? Come on. Tony Blair. That could have been a Tony Blair, an aspiration speech that Tony Blair could have given, helping, giving everyone the opportunity to have a good life and helping people up at the same time. Thatcher, Blair, Miliband, Corbyn, but maybe sometimes at a push. You know, Keir Starmer. They all say that.
Or maybe being called Molly May Thatcher is a compliment.
No.
Right. OK, on that, now let's return to the story, of course, at hand at the top of the programme. An urgent question, as we said earlier, is currently underway in the House of Commons on the issue of a drinks event in Downing Street during the first lockdown in May 2020. The Paymaster General, Michael Ellis, is responding for the government. Let's take a look at a question he got a moment ago from the Conservative MP, Desmond Swain.
All this should be a powerful corrective to the urge to order the rest of our lives, shouldn't it?
Well, we each of us in this House, and no doubt everywhere else, live our lives in the best way that we can. And those of us in positions of responsibility acknowledge that responsibility. That is why there is an investigation in progress which will get to the bottom of all of these matters, and that is in progress.
Desmond Swain there, Harry, obviously reflecting anger there on the Conservative benches.
Well, this is a perfect sort of example of exactly the problem Boris Johnson is facing at the moment. He's got an opposition that's decided to turn up to the football match for once with their boots on and their gloves on, and they're, you know, knocking 7 shades of all sorts out of the government at the same time, as his backbenchers are livid about lockdown. They want no more restrictions. They want a named date for all this to end. They want it all to go away, and they're going to use this because they hate lockdown. They hate what's happened to the Tory party. They hate what's become of them, and they're going to use everything in their armoury to beat up the Prime Minister. So he's stuck in the middle of 2 warring tribes.
Laura, do you agree with that?
I'm reflecting on it, actually. I don't know if I do agree. I mean, I don't want to see any more lockdowns, but I'm not there to lay into the Prime Minister. And you know, I voted for Plan B. So I don't think I quite agree with that. I recognise some of what Harry's saying, but I don't think that the backbench is quite as binary as he suggests.
Pippa?
Well, there are 2 extremes, aren't there? And then the sort of the vast majority of people in the middle. But as we know very well from Plan B and the scale of the rebellion there from the Conservative backbenchers, there's enough of them to make trouble for the Prime Minister. And watching that clip, what I was really struck by was poor Michael Ellis having to stand up and come out with the line, which Edward Argyle did on the radio this morning, and others have, and presumably will do, over however long it takes for the report eventually to be published. I mean, it just doesn't seem sustainable.
Right, what can you do, though, between now and then? What more can you ask for, Emily?
I think we're perfectly clear about what we want. We've asked for some time for the police to be involved. At long last, the police now look like they're about to get involved. We want the Prime Minister to come to the House to explain what's going on. We want to know the truth. All
right, and Prime Minister's Questions, of course, is tomorrow, and I will be back with Politics Live then at 11:15. But from all of us here and to all of our guests, thank you very much. Bye-bye.